So this is week 2 of just 3 weeks that we're doing in the book of Ruth. And so if you missed last week, I'm going to catch us up here in a second. We read through chapter 1 last week together, and we left the story in a place that's pretty rough. It's a pretty rough ending point that we got to in Ruth last week. There wasn't a lot of resolve with it. So I want to move tonight through the rest of the story where we can see that God was crafting something really amazing the entire time, even though it didn't feel like it. So just this refresher to get us up to speed. The story of Ruth centers on a family that lived in a time that was described this way. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. That's what the world they lived in, which is nothing like what we live in now. So we can't relate to that at all. We feel good about that, right? Now, it's very relatable. We can feel what this culture probably looked like and what probably went on in it. So we walked through this story last week about this tragedy that leaves a woman named Naomi, husbandless, and then her 2 sons also pass all in a couple of verses. And so her daughter-in-laws are with her. And the story centers on Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth, who are alone. I wrote, they're alone together, which doesn't make any sense, but it's actually the name of my autobiography if you want to pick one up on the way out tonight. Alone, they're alone together. They have each other, but they feel so alone, right? They have no family to practice this Jewish custom. We looked at it last week. We looked at it back when we did Genesis, this custom that when a man died, one of his brothers would marry his widow and raise that man's kids as his own, that they would keep on their father's name, their father's inheritance, and everything would run as if the father was still there. They don't have anybody to do that. They don't have any hope for a family legacy at this point. And this is a big deal. It frames the story that we're going to walk into tonight because the possibilities are very, very limited for Naomi and Ruth in terms of their very survival, right? The world was not friendly to vulnerable people, really of any kind. And so to reiterate, I'm going to do this several times tonight, the climate of this culture was that everybody was doing whatever they felt like doing, right? And we know this, when the right thing to do becomes anything you want it to be, you get cultures with no standards, right? And that's the world they lived in, and sometimes I fear that's the world maybe that we live in, right? But everyone can do whatever they feel like, and there's really no standard for right and wrong. So these women in this vulnerable place, they share a bond in a couple different ways. They have this bond that comes from this tragedy they walk through together, but also they form a bond that we looked at last week by Ruth choosing to follow the ways of Naomi, by Ruth choosing to be with her grieving mother-in-law. And what we looked at last week is that when Ruth said to her famously, she said, "Where you go, I will go, and your God will be my God." She was making a declaration to Naomi that she was actually going to start to follow this God named Yahweh, that's the God of the Israelites. And Ruth wanted to be no longer from Moab, but she wanted to be instead an Israelite and follow after Yahweh. It was a really, really big deal. And even another big deal would be that Ruth is standing by Naomi as she's caught in all this anger and all this grief. If you were here last week, Naomi changes her name, and the name that she chooses is the name bitter. She says, "I'm bitter towards God for everything that's happened to me." And we can understand that a little bit, right? So last week we ended in this spot where the story had not found any resolve. It was kind of up in the air. But the way that we wrapped it was this. With our modern understanding of Ruth, if we can read the whole story and know that it ends in a certain way, we know this. All stories in the Bible point to Jesus. And since that's true about this story as well, last week we left it saying this. This story is going to have a Jesus-style redemption coming as well, and it's going to be really, really good. So that's where we are tonight. Ruth has demonstrated to Naomi this word hesed. It's this word, this Hebrew word that is so much more than just a word, it's a concept. And so I want to set that up again too because it comes up a few times tonight. We see it in our Bible translated a lot of times as kindness, that God is kind, that God has been good. But it's actually a word that pulls together a whole bunch of positive attributes of God. So things like love, mercy, grace, kindness, goodness, benevolence, loyalty, and his covenant faithfulness, which to just reiterate is even when he makes an agreement with us, even when we break it, he stays strong with it and he continues to give us his promises even when we wander. All of that is rolled into this one word, hesed. It's a really difficult word to translate because of how much richness there is in it. So tonight we'll see that a few times. But Ruth is displaying hesed to Naomi as they arrive back in her homeland, with Naomi searching for some help, trying to figure out how to put pieces together, what they're going to do. Ruth is literally holding out life to her in this darkness and in this death that Naomi's experienced. So as we arrive at chapter 2, it's like this. It starts with this little blip of a moment, right? And so like last week we looked at how like my English teacher gave me this story to read in high school, and I was like, "You're going to jail," but she didn't. I had to read it, and this story is seen as a perfect short story by like English majors and people like that because of the way it's crafted. So the narrator is doing something right here at the start of chapter 2 that's letting us know that even though this fact is true, there's no brother to marry Ruth, there's no one to provide for the needs of both Ruth and Naomi, the narrator's saying, don't forget, like put this in your head, this is going to come back. There is this man, and he's on the side of Ruth's husband's family, and he's named Boaz. And he's referred to in chapter 2, verse 1, as a man of good standing. Good standing. Now, that term's not insignificant as the story unfolds because, again, we recall that in this time of people doing whatever they want to, that he's being referred to as someone in good standing, somebody who has a reputation of being upright and being godly, and it's a rare thing in this culture. So they're pointing out to us, out of all the bad dudes out there, we found a good one, right? So if you're single and you're dating, maybe you're on an app or 5 and you're like, there's nobody good out there, this is the world they lived in. And she's going to find the one good man. So there's hope to be found there as well. I know which way you're supposed to swipe, but whatever way you're supposed to swipe them away, right? So, like I said, it's just this blip for a second. It's a plot point or maybe a foreshadowing that we're supposed to remember. As the story unfolds, there was that one guy. What happened to that one guy? It's designed to sit kind of in our head as it unfolds. And remember, again, so the other literary device going on is that the author of this story wrote this as a love story, right? Not my favorite genre, but maybe some of yours, vampire lovers out there. But this is a love story that, so near, far, wherever they are, the two of them will find each other and it will be really, really good, right? That's what we're looking at here. So Ruth, she's about to show us why this book is named after her. This book could have been named after pretty much any character in it. Naomi would have made sense, right? It would have been a really good title. It would have made a lot of sense. Boaz would have made a lot of sense. After tonight, you're going to see why. But more and more, as we see the story unfold, it makes sense why the story is named after Ruth. Here's why it's unusual. This book is the only book in the Old Testament that's named after a non-Jewish person. So of all the people, every single title, she's the only one. And then more than that, she's the only non-Jewish woman in the entire Bible to have a book named after her. So Ruth, she gets this honor of having this book named after her, maybe for multiple reasons, but a big one is this. She continues in this story to exhibit a faith that alters the circumstances around her. That's unusual. That doesn't really even make sense. So last week she did it when we talked about how she left her entire past behind. She left everything she knew to take on this new faith, this new way of life, to go to a place she'd never been before, to believe that this Jewish God, Yahweh, was real and was going to order her steps. And then she does it again tonight by telling Naomi this as our story starts. She goes and tells her, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find a way to make a living for us. I'm going to provide a path forward so that we can eat and be provided for. And she goes out to the wheat fields to do this, which is kind of ominous sounding. And even if you're not gluten-free, it's kind of ominous sounding in and of itself, right? She's doing something here that I think is easy to miss if we're just reading the story. It's tempting to keep going quickly, but I want to zoom in for just a second because I think it's really interesting. Naomi is a wreck. Like you start to picture what Naomi would look like after losing her husband and both of her sons, taking this journey back home. And like we saw last week when she arrived home, everybody was talking about her, right? She's a wreck. And Ruth is holding everything together for her. And some of us, maybe we know what that feels like, to be the person holding things together for somebody that just can't do it. Or maybe we know what it's like to be the person that everybody rallies around, right? These are powerful moments and they're big deals. Ruth's carrying the burden for all of them, and she's being there for Naomi in these moments where she's venting and lamenting and she just can't make sense of it. It's a lot. Ruth is holding a lot. And then she says, I'm going to go work as well. She volunteers to do this thing called gleaning in the fields. Gleaning is a practice that is protected by Levitical laws. The Levitical law is all of the rules in this book, Leviticus, that told Jewish people this is the way to order your life and how to live. So if you've ever been one of those people, it's like, hey, I'm going to start reading the Bible. I can't wait. And you flip it open and you're like, Leviticus, here we go. And you're like, oh no, like 5 minutes in, this is one of those. So in chapter 25, there's about 30 verses that explain how to glean, how to do it properly, and what it might look like. It's this idea, though, that widows and poor get to pick up the pieces and the scraps of the harvest after the initial work is done by the people harvesting the wheat. So leave some for the poor, leave some for the widow. The women of a field's owner, his own family, might be tasked with doing this work already for the family. So there was competition for it. They didn't want to leave anything behind. And not to mention, once again, they're living in a time where people don't really care about law. They don't care what's right. They don't care what they're supposed to do. They're just trying to go out and do whatever they can for themselves. So the idea that Ruth could get this right afforded to her is questionable to start with in of itself. So we have to put ourselves into a mindset of a people that lived in such a time where looking out for number one was the top priority. Are we able to do that? Maybe a little bit, right? So going out to glean for Ruth was, again, another risk, another act of faith, another step into a kind of a tumultuous unknown. She's exercising faith. She's saying, if I go out and go for it, something good's going to come of it. It's a risky spot to be in, but it's also one that requires perseverance. And a lot of times, we all know this from our own lives. When you're in this spot and you're risking, sometimes things get a lot worse before they get better, don't they? And we all know that, and she also does in this story. The circumstances so happen to work out well for her, though. That she's in the fields that happen to belong to this man named Boaz. This man who is from their family line, who could be one of the few people on the entire planet that could improve her and Naomi's situation. Here's the author saying, love stories coming back, right? Tom Cruise, take that. Here's how it unfolds. Ruth is working so hard and so diligently that Boaz notices it. He's like, who is working so hard out there? And he asks one of his field overseers, who is that? And the man says, oh, it's that foreign lady. It's that Moabite. It's that person that showed up, but she's been working harder than everybody else. And so importantly, the text reminds us this 5 times in chapter 2 alone. Ruth isn't like us. Ruth is from somewhere else. Ruth is a foreigner. Ruth is different. And here the overseer says, that's that other person. That the cards are stacked against Ruth even more, but then Boaz hears this and it sparks something in him that shows us even more of his character. He has this compassion when he hears that. Verse 2:8 says this, it says, so Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled. So Boaz, in that kind of seemingly strange paragraph, is opening a ton of doors for Ruth. Here's what he's up to. He gives her a new status. So he gives her the same status as somebody from his own household. He says, you get to glean with the women in my fields. They're the people who belong to me. He raises her from foreigner to family, essentially. And then he tells her that he's instructed the men to leave her alone. Now, again, in a society where people are doing whatever they want to, in a time where there's no cameras and there's very different laws, we can only imagine what Boaz is protecting her from, but we can start to imagine, right? We can understand that she was in a dangerous spot and that the risk that she was putting herself in to be in those fields at all was even bigger than we know. It's rough any way you slice it, right? This is huge. In a culture like this, Boaz is protecting her. He's giving her a level of protection that is life-changing. Then he tells her this. He says, drink from the water that the men prepared, which sounds like kind of a throwaway sentence, but there's 2 things that are pretty big going on there. He's turning 2 social mores on their head. The first one is that men are normally served by women and that Israelites are served by foreigners. And so Boaz is telling this Moabite woman, you have a place of honor. You will be served in my fields. Understandably, Ruth's reaction is very strong to this. She says, it says this, at this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me a foreigner? And then we find out that maybe Boaz knows more than we thought. He's been playing coy. He says this, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland, and you came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Boaz is recognizing in Ruth that she's following after God. He recognizes that she's following after Yahweh. And so last week we talked about this faith and this risk, that Ruth undertook this faith and this risk, and she left these false gods of her hometown, her homeland, and she became a follower of Yahweh, right? So Boaz is seeing in her this change, this gradual change that happens when somebody starts to follow after God's ways. A lot of times it becomes evident in the life of brand new believers as they start to follow after Jesus, like whether it's imperfectly or slowly, full of mistakes. The longer that we follow after God, the more people notice that there's something different, that you've changed in a good way. And that's what's happening right here with Boaz and Ruth. She's working hard, like physically working hard to make ends meet, and he sees that it's motivated by love, by her love for her mother-in-law, probably for her love for her late husband, but most of all for her Lord, for this Yahweh that she's just getting to know. Ruth's faith has led to favor. This favor in the eyes of Boaz, and it gives her this possibility of rising above the circumstances of her life and where she's been stuck. So she goes home that night, and a couple things happen. Boaz feeds her this incredible meal, and then he gives her so much grain. One of the commentaries that I read said it actually would have been impossible for her to take all this grain home. It was so heavy. He gives her so much. She eats this meal that is extravagant, and it tells us that there's leftovers at the end of it. It's a foreshadowing of Jesus in the New Testament feeding 5,000 people with a child's lunch, having leftovers, and people saying, how is this possible? Boaz gives Ruth a meal that has leftovers. And Naomi, she gets a great meal from those leftovers. And she marvels at this haul of wheat that Ruth got from those leftovers in the field, the chaff that fell to the ground. And here's what we're finding out in this story. What we see as leftover, both things and people, God sees as game changers. God sees as valuable. And Ruth isn't a leftover anymore. The chaff that she gleaned isn't just leftovers anymore. It's a substantial energy source. It's something for them to eat and to live off of. And so I feel like this. When we feel overlooked, or we feel like Ruth, we feel like we're a leftover, we're unimportant, that nobody notices, this story is telling us this. God is actually preparing for us to be the thing that changes it all for somebody else. And he's about to do that here with Ruth, to use leftovers to make something really great. Naomi says this, where did you glean today? Where did you go? How'd you possibly get that much food, is what she's saying. And she says, blessed be the man who took notice of you. And then Ruth told her mother-in-law, the name of the man I worked with today is Boaz. Here's the soap opera zoom in, right? Like the music's playing, there's fireworks going off, there's like the dun dun dun, like whatever's going on there. This is Naomi saying, oh my gosh, it's him, right? She says, that man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. This is this thing that we talked about, but I'm going to highlight again. It's this. The faith and the favor has now opened up wide to hope. It's hope. It's specifically this. Hope that this ordeal has an ending. Hope that the suffering that we've been through has a purpose. And hope that this pain isn't going to be wasted or be in vain, but instead that God hasn't forgotten us. Naomi and Ruth, he hasn't forgotten us, but instead he's worked behind the scenes the entire time. He's been doing something really good from all of the bad. He's been making a way for them. As God has said, his goodness, his love that has breathed life into the grief, particularly for Naomi. And Naomi's awakened and she hatches a plan. So we get some more soap opera kind of stuff going on here. She hatches a plan to make sure that they maximize this opportunity. We found Boaz. This is the man who can redeem us, who can save us, and basically what she's saying is this. This is the man who can buy all of our possessions that my husband owned and bring us in as his family. And she says, we will not waste this. She knows those 30 verses in Leviticus 25. She knows exactly how it's supposed to go. And so she wants to make sure that Boaz, that he understands that in his place of opportunity and privilege that he is supposed to care for and provide for them. Boaz has already shown some of this. some of the same care that Leviticus 25 calls on him to do without knowing that he's doing it, without knowing that he's under obligation to do it. That's the kind of person he is, and that's highlighting that as well. Here's her plan. It centers on this. Here's how we get Boaz on board for the long haul. She tells Ruth, tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. It's kind of poetic, but here's what he's going to be doing. He's going to be making the wheat into something edible on this thing called the threshing floor. This process took a very long time. So Naomi knew this is going to take all night. She knows that they're going to be there and they're going to sleep there because they protect their crop from thieves. So she knows tonight is our chance. Boaz will sleep there. This will be our opportunity. She goes on and she gives quite a plan. Here's her plan. Take a shower, so wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, go to the place that he is lying. Then go uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. And then Ruth says this, I will do whatever you say to Naomi. So I want to step into this paragraph culturally because there's a lot going on, and I've heard this taught just with American English before, and it doesn't make a ton of sense. So there's more going on than even what it sounds like. Naomi is telling Ruth, certainly smell good and look good, put on your best Nuggets shirt, whatever that might look like. That part isn't lost, but the rest of it is specifically cultural. Like there's a lot going on. So she says, uncover his feet and lie down once he's asleep. And she says, do it after a good meal and some good wine. So Boaz and his boys go down to the Chili's, and as they return, they're feeling good. That's your opportunity, okay? So the uncover your feet part is this phrasing of words that's used 3 different ways in the Old Testament. It can be used as a euphemism twice and straight up just what it says the 3rd time. The euphemisms are this. The first one is a sexual euphemism. And the other one is a euphemism for what happens to you after that Chili's. And so using the facilities is the other euphemism for that. And so we know here reading it that the second one, he's not using the facilities in this case, so we can get rid of that one. Scholars say this, that although it seems like there's something else going on, that maybe that other euphemism is being used, scholars say Ruth is literally uncovering Boaz's feet, and here's why. Boaz would be fast asleep, aided by 2 El Presidentes, and he'd be in the state where she had to figure out how to wake him up, right? And so uncovering his feet would bring a draft into his feet and slowly, without startling him too bad, wake him up and allow her to unhatch the rest of the plan. So when that happened, he would see Ruth sleeping at his feet, and Ruth would be in the place where his wife would have otherwise have been if he had one. So Boaz would hear from Ruth, I'm interested in you, from that. See, Boaz and Ruth don't have physical contact in this story. I've heard it taught otherwise, but they don't. It signals this. In these same times, in these times where people are doing whatever they saw right in their own eyes, these two are different. These two are different. And as Ruth executes the plan, we see exactly how they're different. It follows like this. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Now, in the middle of the night, something startled the man, which was probably his cold feet, and he turned. And there was a woman lying at his feet. Now, if this is again, this is a romantic love story. If this is one of our Hollywood stories, the dude's like, we're going to zoom in on his face and he'll be like, jackpot, right? But that's not going on here. Instead, he turns to her and he says, who are you? She says, I am your servant, Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. Now, this kind of news didn't make Boaz freak out because, again, culturally, he understands what she's saying. He's understanding from what she says to him that I am supposed to do this Leviticus 25 thing for this woman. Now, who knows what that sparks in him or what it would spark in us, but for Boaz's part and the kind of person he is, he's honored to find out that he has this obligation to Ruth. That's what it says. He says, the Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. Those of us hitting 44 tomorrow get it, right? So instead, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you're a woman and a noble character. Although it is true that I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, there's another who is more closely related than I. And here's a plot point. This is a soap opera plot point. There's another guy with like long hair that's going to come along, and he's involved too. But he tells her this: sleep here tonight under my protection. And that's what the cloak that he puts over her signifies. Tomorrow, I'll go see if this relative who has a right to buy the land and to inherit all of Eli's family's things, including Ruth, is interested. So Boaz reacts the same way to Ruth that Ruth reacted to Naomi. He says, all that you say, I will do. So this story right here is highlighting at the same time, so it's dually highlighting that Boaz and Ruth have strong character, that they're different than other people. She's not just different because she's a foreigner, she's different because she's in tune to the right things. So this next morning, again importantly, Boaz sends Ruth home before other people can see her. He does it early on, before people can fill in their own stories, before they can start to talk, before they can spread rumors, before they can look down on her. And so if we trust that this story is a story about two people of unusual moral fiber, this is further illustrating that Boaz took care of her in ways that other people wouldn't have. So Ruth returns to Naomi, and she's full of hope. Her faith has led to favor, that's led to hope. And she says, we have a chance. There's more food that she brings. Naomi is literally filled up again, and Naomi tells her, our fate should be decided quickly. That spiritual and physical emptiness that we saw Naomi struggling through last week is being filled. Her physical emptiness is being filled right here, and her spiritual emptiness is starting to have some light break through. But we're watching the author of this story illustrate hope that a redeemer can give somebody. Hope that this redeemer can make things different, right? And even as they're waiting for that redemption, things start to change. And we can know from this story, as it points to Jesus, that as we wait for our own redemption, as we wait for our own redeemer, both literally and figuratively, the emptiness that we face can also be turned into wholeness. That through Jesus, it could be made into fullness. So, before I wrap this story, and it's a good ending, I want to do a quick aside, because there's two things that, I read this story like a dozen or more times, and there's two things that stuck out that I couldn't make fit like a talk, but I think they're really strong, and I think they tie it together. So there's just this is like a sidebar in your textbook, okay? This is my little sidebar tonight that if you would just indulge me for my birthday. I have a couple things I want to share that I saw in this text that have just kind of been ping-ponging in my brain for the last couple of weeks. The first one is this. In this story, we see that the definition of manliness in the Bible is complex. Manliness is a complex issue. It's not at all like what bookstores have been telling us, right? Some of that sword twirling and chest thumping stuff is good and fine and has its place, but it's not the whole picture. So Boaz is proving to us in this story that a real man, right? A real man comes in a lot of different forms. We see Boaz, and he's a picture of this prophecy in the book of Micah. Micah is this prophet who's been asking God, how can the people make their sin right? And this is what Micah's told. It says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. This is who Boaz is. Boaz is just and merciful and humble. He's the exact opposite of what a lot of the things in our culture tell us a man should be, and that's a good thing, because manliness is about character and not about physical or outward attributes, and Boaz proves that to us in this story, and I love it. So the second one is this. Ruth and Naomi are being rescued in this story, but they are far from helpless, okay? So Ruth and Naomi are survivors. They're strong. They've moved through so many things that we can only begin to, and they continue to push forward. We're about to read the resolve of this story, and it involves this redeemer, this kinsman redeemer, by Jewish law, the rescuer. And it's a really cool thing. But the rescue doesn't come from Boaz, or the man. The rescue comes from God. And in this story, it's a direct result of the faith, favor, and hope, plus the resolve of these two women, and particularly Ruth. Ruth is an amazing picture of a person that exercises faith and takes action at the same time to get the results that she needs and that she wants. And I think it's inspiring for any one of us to see this. These are amazing women in this story. Okay, so that's the end of my sidebar. So here's how the story wraps up. Chapter 4 centers on Boaz. After this encounter and this request from Ruth, and he goes to do the legal things he had to do in order to make this relationship a marriage. So the headline of chapter 4 says, Boaz marries Ruth, but instead, where we find him is at the city gate, which is where all the business was done, where all the people would gather. And what Boaz does is that he shows up and he goes and he collects 10 city elders as witnesses to what he's about to do. He wants to make sure that what he's about to say to this other man is going to count. And to sum it up, Boaz lets this relative with a closer claim know this. He says, hey, all that land that Eli owned, that Eli and Naomi owned, that is yours to buy. It's your right to have it. And the guy quickly says, yes, please, I'll take that land, right? My grandpa taught me this. Maybe some of yours did too. Land's the only thing they can't make more of, right? He told me that when I was a kid. And it's true. They can't. And so this man hears that he has a chance to buy some cheap land, and he's all over it. But then Boaz says this, hold on. You also are going to acquire in this a brand new wife named Ruth. And I love the relative's response. This is his response. He says, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. Here's how I translate that. I hear it this way. My wife would murder me. I just love it. I absolutely love it. This guy is not interested in that for whatever reason that is actually the thing. And so Boaz is now cleared to make this a legal transaction, to take the land of Eli and Naomi and to marry Ruth. Now remember with me, this is the author's idea of a love story. So this is the kind of punched up ending where, I don't know, I'm going to date myself, Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant find each other across a flower shop or something and everybody's crying, right? Like this is that ending and that moment. But the manner that it delivers to us and Ruth is a legal transaction from Boaz and some legal speak. And it says this, then the elders and the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing, and I'm not going to try to say the name of that city, and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. So all these people in the city at the same time memorized the speech and said it together. I always love stuff like that. However that works, the feeling and the idea is that they want this blessing to be on these two. It's heartfelt and it's powerful and it's redemptive in a bunch of ways itself. Here's what we have here. It's a prayer for this union, for this marriage, for this brand new thing to be as powerful as these people are. For Ruth to be a nurturing matriarch of the chosen people. In a lot of Jewish festivals, they would read Ruth right after Proverbs 31, which is a famous passage about a woman of noble character. Ruth to be that kind of person. For Boaz to be upright and respected far and wide. And for the redeeming that Boaz did of this widow Ruth, for all of that, the prayer would be that this family would be restored. That it would be similar to the way that Judah and Tamar's story restored a family in turmoil. If you remember that from Genesis, it's a rough story that turns into a beautiful one because it's in the line of Jesus. Out of the chaos and confusion and the less than ideal conditions of the story, we get this line, this royal line of King David. We get this royal line of eventually Jesus himself. And this family's about to add a child named Obed. And Obed is King David's grandfather. King David wrote those Psalms that we read last week that ask God, why when life hurts are you so far away? Why when stuff is going so poorly do you seem to hide? That David, that King David that perceives the perfect King Jesus, who's still generations away, but he comes from this line of Boaz and Ruth. Jesus is from a line of redemption. Jesus is from a line of faith and favor and hope. Jesus is from a line of brave acts and delayed results. And as the sons and daughters of that kind of God, you and I are the sons and daughters of faith and favor and hope. Naomi now has the hope that her family will continue on. She has an heir. She has something to hope for in this world as well as in life to come. Ruth and Boaz and even Naomi give us an example of what it looks like to rest in faith and favor. Now, God wasn't quiet. When Naomi questioned where he was, God was at work. When Naomi asked the questions, God, what are you up to? In these times of tragedy, in these times where it doesn't make sense, in these times where everything felt hopeless, God was at work. God was right there with her. And Naomi now sees that her faith and the favor of God and the hope that she put in him has combined to give her hope that God is going to continue to do an amazing thing. We rest in that same faith tonight and that same favor from God as we look to our true Redeemer, to Jesus, who rescues us from all the things on life and on earth that are kind of normal, and all the things that are difficult, all the things that ground us and floor us and make us think, God, what are you doing? Where are you? We have a God who's just and merciful and humble. We have a God that invites each one of us to be the same. So let's pray. God, tonight, I come to you and I thank you that we believe these things, that you are just and merciful and humble. God, I believe that in faith you show us favor and we get to have hope because of it. So God, I pray for the people in this room tonight that have a story where they can look back and see that. God, I pray that we remember it and that we thank you for it tonight. We thank you for the things that you did, the doors you opened that we had no idea you were opening in these times that we were in pain, but you were up to something. And God, I think that we can look back at it and say, God, because you're good, you moved me through that. And then God, for those of us who are sitting in the middle of one of those right now, whether it's something that feels mundane or something that's beyond words that we can't even start to talk about, God, I pray tonight that we would also understand that because you are so good, because you are so merciful, that you continue to make a way for us, that you're working behind the scenes, that you're working good out of the bad in a way that only you can. And I pray tonight, as Boaz was a kinsman redeemer that was ultimately a stand-in for the redeemer of Jesus himself for Naomi and Ruth, I pray tonight that we could understand too that our way is made by trusting in the redemption of Jesus, who brings life to death, that brings light to darkness and continues to battle for us. And I pray this in his name, amen.